You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And there is no excuse for the Orange losing this game. None, zero, I don't want to hear it. None. Actually, zero. I went through top to bottom, the wheel of excuses. I tried to think of all the possible excuses for what has gone wrong with Syracuse this season, and there are zero. Let's break it down. Injuries. Let's start there. Injuries. Yeah, Donnie Freeman is not playing for Syracuse basketball. Obviously, that hurts Syracuse. I think we can all agree. And hey, who knows? If Donnie Freeman is in this game, maybe Syracuse basketball does win. Is it an excuse? The answer is no. Because, yeah, Syracuse has an injury in Donnie Freeman. He is out for the season. But guess what? So does Miami. They also have a key player that's out. Nigel Pack averages 14 points per game at the guard spot. He has not played since December. He's really good, Nigel Pack. But guess what? He hasn't played either. So both sides had a key player that was missing. Very similar to when Syracuse lost at Notre Dame. And a lot of people said, well, the Orange didn't have J.J. Starling, so of course they lost. Well, yeah, you're ignoring the fact that Notre Dame didn't have Marcus Burton. We saw how good he was when he came to the Dome when he was finally healthy. Syracuse did manage to beat Notre Dame the second time around, though. It works both ways with the injuries. Yeah, Syracuse has a key player out. Guess what? So does Miami. It levels the playing field. And I understand that they're two different positions. One's a forward, one's a guard. Similar impact, you can argue, though. Both key players to their team. There's no injury excuse here. By the way, Syracuse basketball, they've won games without Donnie Freeman. It's not an excuse to lose to Miami, even if they had Nigel Pack in this game, which they didn't. None. Don't want to hear about the injuries. Talent. Was talent an excuse for this performance? Really? I mean, I get Matthew Cleveland's really good. I understand that. He's probably the best player on the floor either side. Jalil Bethea is a former 5-star recruit that almost went to Syracuse. I understand that. But you're telling me that Syracuse doesn't have the talent to beat the worst team in the ACC? They had one conference win. They're not going to make the ACC tournament barring a miracle run down the stretch. Not enough talent to beat Miami? The talent excuse can work for Duke. Maybe you can say it works for Louisville and Clemson. It doesn't work for Miami. No. So you don't have the injury excuse. You don't have the talent excuse. Oh, by the way, their coach quit during the season. Their coach actually quit back in December. They have been running on an interim head coach. Jim Larinaga, he quit. He cited NIL as the reason why he stepped down, but let's all be honest, that's not really true. Nothing changed between, and I said this on the ACC squad, nothing changed between March and the beginning of the basketball season, except realizing that his team wasn't really good, so he decided to step down. He cited NIL, but that's just a cop-out. So their coach quit. They also have a star player injured. Do they really have that much more talent than Syracuse basketball, considering they have one ACC game win? Who else has Miami played this season? I'm just going to go through some of their results. Okay? Give me a minute. Okay. So they have a loss to Charleston Southern this season. They lost to Mount St. Mary's in overtime this season. Their only other conference win was against Notre Dame at home. Coincidentally, the same team that Syracuse went 1-1 against. This team just isn't very good. I'm sorry to say that. I mean, they lost to Drake, who's actually good, but you still get my point. Talent, their coach quitting, injuries, but it's NIL. It's NIL. NIL is the reason for all of this, right? I'm going to put that narrative to bed right now. NIL is a problem. It is not the problem for Syracuse basketball. And we'll diagnose the problem in the next segment here. NIL is an excuse in the sense that Syracuse basketball, in its present state, cannot compete for a national championship. They can't. They don't have the money to do it. They do not have the horses to actually get it done, to actually be a legitimate contender for a national championship. Their only real way of competing for one is if they snuck into the NCAA tournament and went on a miracle run, which we see pretty much every year, that somebody comes out of nowhere. I mean, St. Peter's was a 15 seed that went to the Elite Eight. NC State last year is another example. Going to the Final Four after having to win their conference tournament, the ACC, just to get there, just to keep their season alive, because they weren't going to get in at large. So NIL keeps Syracuse from being like a top 5 seed in the NCAA tournament because they don't have the players to really be able to do that. That I agree with. But NIL is not an excuse for Syracuse basketball to lose at Miami. It's not an excuse. You should be able to beat the worst team in the ACC. Home or on the road, I don't care. Figure it out. Hopefully that puts it to bed. Hopefully it does. So there's no excuse for Syracuse basketball losing this game. There's no NIL excuse. No injuries. Talent? No. Their coach quitting? Adrian Autry hasn't quit. Their coach did. They're running on an interim one. This was embarrassing. Duke needed to be a wake-up call in the sense that that's the bar. That's where you got to get. But man, Miami is the floor for how bad it can really be. And Syracuse basketball just hit it. This needs to be a wake-up call.